The palace of Suleiman the Magnificent rises like a jewel along the banks of the Bosphorus, shimmering under the morning sun. From the outside, it is a symbol of imperial splendor, a kingdom of marble and gold, domes and minarets piercing the sky. Tourists today might imagine the serene beauty of its gardens, the delicate echo of fountains, the grandeur of its halls. But behind the towering gates and velvet drapes, a world existed that was invisible to the public eye, a world where beauty and danger coexisted, where whispers could alter the course of empires, and where human desire became a weapon as potent as a sword. This was the harem, a gilded prison of temptation, power, and silent terror. At first glance, it seems intoxicating. Concubines adorned in silk and jewels, the scent of roses and rare perfumes lingering in every corridor, the soft rustle of fabric as women glide past carved marble balconies. To the untrained eye, it is paradise. But every smile, every whispered conversation, hides calculated ambition, jealousy, and schemes that could topple kings. The harem was not just a private space for the sultan's pleasure, it was a microcosm of power itself, a secret engine driving politics, war, and succession. It was both seductive and poisonous, a place where love could be mortal, and loyalty was always conditional. Suleiman himself is a figure of paradox. To the outside world, he is a statesman of unmatched brilliance, a commander who expands the Ottoman Empire with unerring precision, a ruler whose name evokes awe and fear alike. Inside the palace, he is a man of desires and obsessions, a sultan whose whims ripple across marble floors and silk chambers. Every decision, every glance, every favor carries consequences that extend far beyond the palace walls. The harem is his instrument, a theater of hidden politics where women vie for influence, and every gesture is a calculated step in a perilous dance. The delicate beauty masks deadly intent, the opulence conceals ambition that could destroy families and destabilize empires. Here, intimacy is currency, and seduction is power. The walls themselves seem alive, witnesses to conversations no one else may ever hear, secrets that could unravel lives if exposed. The concubines, once ordinary girls from distant lands, are transformed into both ornaments and strategists, trained in the subtle arts of manipulation, observation, and survival. Every glance carries meaning, every movement signals loyalty or betrayal. The harem is not merely a house of pleasure, it is a battlefield, where alliances are forged, enemies are silenced, and destinies are quietly rewritten. And yet it is human. Within these walls, the women feel love, fear, hope, and despair as sharply as any soldier on the battlefield or vizier in council. They navigate a labyrinth of desire and danger, balancing the sultan's favor with their own survival. For those who misstep, the consequences are swift and merciless: exile, disgrace, or even death. And the sultan himself, for all his magnificence, is not immune to the subtle traps of the harem. A misjudged favor, a misplaced trust, a whispered betrayal could shake the foundations of his empire. The harem is the secret heart of Suleiman's reign. It pulses with power hidden beneath layers of beauty, pleasure, and ceremony. It is a world where the softest whisper can command armies, where jealousy can ignite wars, and where love and cruelty walk hand in hand. To understand the empire, one must first understand this hidden kingdom. For within these walls, history itself is both written and rewritten, and the secrets harbored here have the power to destroy or sustain a realm. It is this paradox, the delicate intertwining of beauty and danger, pleasure and peril, love and cruelty, that defines the harem. The world outside may celebrate Suleiman the Magnificent as a ruler of unmatched brilliance, yet it is here, in this shadowed sanctuary of silk and secrecy, that the true story of power, ambition, and destruction begins. What was whispered behind these velvet curtains, what plots were hatched in candlelit chambers, and what desires went unchecked could, if revealed, shake the very foundations of one of history's greatest empires. And it is in this tension, between the gilded splendor and the shadowed intrigue, that our story begins. Suleiman the Magnificent is a man who inspires awe even centuries after his death, Yet understanding the Sultan requires stepping beyond the facade of imperial grandeur into the private shadows of his life. To the outside world, he was the architect of an empire at its peak, a ruler whose campaigns stretched the Ottoman territories from the deserts of Arabia to the gates of Vienna. His name alone was enough to command obedience, strike fear into enemies, and elicit admiration from allies. But within the palace, within the walls of his private chambers, Suleiman was also a man driven by desire, obsession, and the relentless need for control. Every glance he cast, every favor he granted, had consequences not just for those in his immediate presence but for the empire itself. In this duality, the public sultan and the private man, lies the secret to understanding the true power of his harem. Suleiman's genius as a ruler was inseparable from his human nature, a blend of intellect and instinct that allowed him to manipulate not only armies and laws but also people's hearts. Those who entered his private world found themselves both mesmerized and terrified, for the Sultan was unpredictable. He could reward with generosity, elevate the lowliest concubine to untouchable status, or punish with a coldness that left no trace of mercy. His presence in the harem was magnetic, a force that drew ambition, fear, and desire into a tangled web. Every smile he offered was scrutinized, every shadow of a frown became a harbinger of doom. To live within his orbit was to be constantly aware that power and pleasure were inseparable, that the Sultan's favor was both a blessing and a potential curse. It is here, in the folds of intimacy and secrecy, that Suleiman's genius and danger intersected. The Sultan was not merely a passive consumer of beauty and desire. He wielded the harem as an instrument of governance. Concubines were not simply companions, they were agents in a delicate political chess game. Each woman's influence could sway the Sultan's decisions, alter the balance of power among the viziers, and shape the future of succession. Yet this power came with rules only Suleiman understood. Loyalty, subtlety, and obedience were prized above all else, and betrayal, real or imagined, was met with consequences that could extend far beyond the palace walls. One of the most striking paradoxes of Suleiman's private world is how desire became both a personal indulgence and a tool of empire. His relationships within the harem were intensely personal, yet they were also political. A smile, a touch, a whispered word could elevate a concubine from anonymity to influence and simultaneously redirect the course of governance. Harem Sultan, the woman who would become his legal wife, exemplifies this fusion of intimacy and strategy. She was no mere object of desire, she was a player whose cunning, intellect, and charm allowed her to ascend to the apex of the palace hierarchy. Suleiman's favor became a weapon, a lens through which the balance of power within the empire itself could be measured. Yet Suleiman's nature was not entirely cold or calculated. There was genuine affection, a fascination with beauty, and moments of vulnerability that made the human drama of the harem so dangerous. A concubine's loyalty could earn a rare smile that elevated her status immeasurably, while a misstep could invite suspicion and swift retribution. The Sultan's emotional range was vast, passionate, cruel, generous, and exacting. To live within this world required intuition and adaptability, a constant negotiation with both fear and ambition. Those who failed to understand this delicate balance often disappeared quietly, their fates sealed by a glance or a whispered accusation. Beyond the personal drama, Suleiman's psychological complexity extended to his perception of power itself. He saw the harem not simply as a collection of women but as a reflection of the empire, a delicate system of hierarchy, loyalty, and control. Every favor granted, every punishment meted out, mirrored the larger mechanisms of rule. In essence, the palace became a microcosm of governance, where ambition, jealousy, and desire intertwined with law, tradition, and political maneuvering. The stakes were never merely personal, they were imperial. A misjudgment in the harem could ripple outward, affecting decisions about war, taxation, and succession. And yet, for all its strategic function, the harem was intensely human, a crucible of emotion and instinct. Suleiman's presence amplified every tension within these walls. Fear mingled with admiration, love with envy, hope with dread. Concubines and advisors alike learned that the Sultan's attention could be both a shield and a weapon. Even the most intelligent strategist could find their plans undone by the Sultan's sudden favor or disfavor, while the humblest servant could rise through the ranks with a single, well-placed smile. The harem was a theater of psychology, where the human heart was both the prize and the battlefield. It is this intricate web of intellect, desire, and fear that made Suleiman uniquely dangerous. His brilliance as a ruler cannot be divorced from his intimate world. The harem was not a side note but a central instrument in the orchestration of power. The Sultan's ability to balance ruthlessness with fascination, strategy with emotion, created an environment where ordinary rules of human interaction were suspended. Here, morality, loyalty, and love were constantly tested, and the consequences of failure were absolute. Understanding Suleiman, then, is inseparable from understanding the secret mechanics of the harem, a place where a glance, a word, or a gesture could ripple through the empire and leave a trail of ambition, betrayal, and sometimes death. By examining Suleiman in this intimate light, we see not only the genius of a sultan but also the peril of human desire when combined with absolute power. The harem was his instrument, his stage, and his mirror. It was where the personal became political, and where the private whims of a man could shape the destiny of millions. The Sultan's shadow stretched beyond the empire's borders, cast not only over lands and armies but over the very hearts and minds of those who lived under his gaze. And it is in this shadowed intersection of desire, control, and human cunning that the story of the harem, and its capacity to shake an empire, truly begins. Within the ornate walls of Topkapi Palace, the harem was a world unto itself, a city of whispers, silk, and secrets hidden from the eyes of the public. From the outside, visitors might see only the shimmering domes, the manicured gardens, and the glittering courtyards. Yet behind those walls lay a carefully constructed ecosystem designed to control, manipulate, and contain desire, a machine as precise and relentless as the most disciplined army. The harem was both home and battlefield, where beauty was currency, intelligence was power, and survival depended on mastering the subtle art of influence. It was a gilded cage, magnificent to behold but merciless to the unwary. The structure of the harem was rigid and hierarchical. At its apex sat the Sultan himself, the ultimate arbiter of favor, whose gaze could elevate a woman to unprecedented power or condemn her to obscurity. Below him were the Sultan's legal wife, a rare and historically significant position, and his most influential concubines. Each woman occupied a place defined not only by birth or beauty but also by her skill in navigating the complex social and political terrain of the palace. The harem functioned as a microcosm of the empire. Order was maintained through rules and rituals, while ambition and rivalry simmered just below the surface. A single misstep, a careless word, or an ill-timed display of envy could trigger a cascade of consequences that reverberated far beyond the walls of the palace. The daily life within the harem was a delicate choreography of protocol, obedience, and manipulation. Women were trained to anticipate the Sultan's moods, to read his subtle gestures, and to interpret the significance of every glance. Their movements, conversations, and expressions were scrutinized, catalogued, and judged. A smile or frown carried weight, a whisper could be repeated in the corridors of power, and even the most trivial action might be remembered for years. It was a world where perception shaped reality, where appearances were carefully curated to maintain influence, and where the line between genuine affection and calculated strategy was almost impossible to discern. Yet it was not all rigid protocol. Within this structured environment, the harem fostered intense personal relationships, friendships, alliances, rivalries, and even enmities that could last a lifetime. The women learned to wield charm, intelligence, and subtle persuasion as weapons, often manipulating one another as skillfully as they sought to manipulate the Sultan. Trust was a rare commodity. Betrayal was ever present, lurking beneath every polished smile and courteous gesture. In this high-stakes arena, a concubine's political acumen could be as important as her beauty, and the most cunning women could rise from anonymity to a position of extraordinary influence, sometimes rivaling the Sultan himself in their power to shape events. The hierarchy was reinforced by rituals that emphasized both obedience and competition. From the elaborate presentation of gifts to the sultan, to carefully staged performances that showcased grace and talent, every event was imbued with psychological weight. The women were constantly evaluated, not merely for their ability to please but for their capacity to navigate the intricate dynamics of influence. Behind the closed doors of the harem, every gesture, every smile, and every conversation became a calculated move in an unspoken game, a game where the stakes were survival, favor, and legacy. Despite the outward glamour, life in the harem was also suffused with danger and tension. The very structure that granted some women extraordinary influence also magnified the consequences of failure. Rivalries could turn deadly, alliances could fracture, and favoritism could shift in a single, unpredictable moment. The sultan's attention was both a shield and a target. Those who earned it could wield unprecedented power, but those who fell out of favor might face exile, humiliation, or even death. The walls of the harem concealed these deadly stakes, offering a veneer of luxury while harboring undercurrents of fear and mistrust. Education and training were crucial components of the harem's operation. The women were not passive ornaments. They were scholars of human psychology, politics, and strategy. They learned languages, memorized court etiquette, and honed their skills in persuasion and negotiation. This training was not just for personal gain. It served the sultan by creating a cadre of women capable of managing the delicate balance of power within the palace. Every conversation could serve as intelligence, every observation as insight. The harem functioned as both a school and a surveillance network, where the lessons of loyalty, obedience, and manipulation were instilled alongside the knowledge necessary to navigate life in one of history's most dangerous courts. The harem also existed as a sensory world, designed to captivate and control through beauty and ritual. Perfumes, fabrics, music, and dance were not merely indulgences, they were instruments of psychological influence. The environment was meticulously crafted to heighten awareness, sharpen perceptions, and subtly guide behavior. Light filtered through intricately carved latticework, casting patterns that shifted with the sun, creating spaces both enchanting and disorienting. Sounds echoed across marble floors in ways that made whispers travel unseen. Even the architecture reinforced hierarchy and control. Each chamber, balcony, and corridor was positioned to maximize both accessibility and surveillance. The sultan, seated at the apex of this orchestrated world, remained at once omniscient and omnipotent, the ultimate arbiter of favor and fear. And yet, beneath the structure and ritual, the harem was deeply human. Women formed bonds, felt genuine love and jealousy, and experienced profound longing and despair. The very intensity of emotion that made the harem a crucible of danger also made it a place of extraordinary human drama. Triumphs and defeats were lived with extreme intimacy. The consequences of ambition were immediate and personal. The stories of concubines who rose to power, of alliances forged and broken, and of plots hatched in shadowy corners, create a tapestry of human psychology that is both fascinating and terrifying. Ultimately, the harem was more than a collection of women. It was a machine of influence, a secret engine that propelled the empire. It shaped the sultan's decisions, impacted succession, and filtered political and military strategy through the lens of desire, jealousy, and ambition. What occurred within these walls could reverberate across continents, turning personal whims into historical consequences. Understanding the harem is therefore essential to understanding the Ottoman Empire at the height of its power. It was not just a place of pleasure but a crucible of ambition, strategy, and hidden influence, where the most ordinary action could carry the weight of empires. In this world of silk and shadow, beauty and ambition intertwined, creating a delicate ecosystem where survival depended on wit, charm, and instinct. The harem machine operated with precision, yet its very mechanisms contained the seeds of chaos. Every favor, every slight, every whispered secret was part of a larger design, a complex network of influence that shaped both the sultan and the empire he ruled. To step into the harem was to step into a world where nothing was as it seemed, where desire and danger were inseparable, and where the line between paradise and prison was razor-thin. Within the opulent corridors of the harem, beauty was never innocent, and desire was never mere indulgence. The women who walked these halls understood a truth as old as power itself. In a place where pleasure and politics intertwined, affection could be lethal, and jealousy could be a weapon sharper than any blade. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word could shift the balance of influence, elevate a concubine to untouchable status, or cast her into irrelevance, or worse, death. It was here, behind layers of silk and perfumed corridors, that the Sultan's favor became both the ultimate prize and the deadliest trap. The harem was not merely a place of personal intimacy, it was a crucible where human ambition collided with political strategy, and where loyalty and betrayal walked hand in hand. The mechanisms of power within the harem were subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders. Favors were granted not only according to beauty or charm but also according to strategic calculation. A woman who could anticipate Suleiman's desires, read the moods of the court, and manipulate relationships with intelligence and grace, could wield influence far beyond her chamber. Conversely, a misjudged word, a display of envy, or an overstep of boundaries could provoke swift and irreversible consequences. In the shadows of the harem, survival required not only skill and intuition but an almost instinctive understanding of the psychology of power. It was a world where appearance often masked intention, where smiles could conceal venom, and where a whispered secret could topple a dynasty. Consider the stories of concubines who became agents of political intrigue, operating with intelligence and foresight that rivaled the viziers themselves. These women learned that the Sultan's attention could be a double-edged sword, a blessing that opened doors to unprecedented influence, yet a hazard that exposed them to envy, suspicion, and plots from rivals. Rivalries were constant, often hidden beneath polite conversation and carefully cultivated smiles, but the consequences were real and immediate. Alliances formed quickly, as did betrayals, and the women of the harem became masters of persuasion, subtlety, and strategy. Their world was a psychological battlefield where wit and charm were as essential as beauty, and where a single miscalculation could mean the end of both favor and life. Jealousy and ambition drove much of the intrigue. The harem, despite its apparent luxury, was suffused with tension. Women competed not just for the Sultan's attention but for positions of influence that allowed them to shape political decisions and succession plans. History is replete with examples of concubines whose ambition led to secret machinations, plotting the downfall of rivals with skillful manipulation and subtlety. Poison, whether literal or metaphorical, was sometimes used. Whispered lies, strategic alliances, and carefully timed interventions in the Sultan's ear could destroy reputations and lives. The most successful women learned to wield these tools with precision, transforming desire into a weapon that could alter the course of the empire itself. The case of Hurrem's Sultan exemplifies this deadly artistry. She was not the first concubine to understand the lethal interplay of ambition and intimacy, but she became perhaps the most famous. Her intelligence and cunning allowed her to navigate the treacherous dynamics of the harem with unparalleled skill. Hurrem understood that the Sultan's favor was the key to influence and that controlling the narrative, shaping perceptions, and manipulating alliances were just as crucial as beauty or charm. She transformed herself from an outsider into a central figure of power, ultimately achieving what few concubines could: unprecedented access to Suleiman's decisions and, through him, the fate of the empire itself. But the path to power was never straightforward. Within the harem, every victory was contested, every favor scrutinized. Concubines watched each other constantly, observing alliances and rivalries, plotting moves that could secure or destroy their positions. Intuition, timing, and an understanding of human nature were as critical as personal charm. Even the Sultan could be manipulated. The cleverest women learned to guide his decisions subtly, ensuring their rivals' influence waned while their own power grew. The politics of desire required precision, patience, and a willingness to embrace both love and cruelty in equal measure. It was not only the women who were affected by this intricate web of intrigue. The Sultan himself was caught in its currents, influenced by affection, jealousy, and manipulation as much as by his own strategic calculations. Personal relationships shaped decisions that could affect entire provinces, armies, and succession plans. Favors granted to one concubine could determine which son would inherit the throne, which vizier would rise or fall, and even which military campaign would be prioritized. In this way, the intimate world of the harem became inseparable from the governance of the empire, illustrating the profound power of private desires when entwined with political authority. The psychological environment of the harem was relentless. Fear and hope existed in constant tension, creating an atmosphere where every word and gesture carried potential consequences. Trust was scarce, and alliances could dissolve overnight. Women learned to navigate this precarious terrain with intelligence and grace, becoming masters of subtle persuasion. The skillful manipulation of perception was paramount. A carefully timed smile, a strategic display of loyalty, or a whispered warning could protect a life, secure favor, or ensure the downfall of a rival. In this place, ambition was an art, and survival depended on understanding the intricate dance of human emotion and political calculation. The harem also served as a silent intelligence network. Concubines, by virtue of their proximity to the sultan, had access to information unavailable to even the most senior officials. They observed conversations, memorized patterns of decision-making, and influenced outcomes through subtle intervention. Knowledge was power, and the ability to gather, interpret, and deploy information could make the difference between obscurity and supremacy. In essence, the harem operated as both a palace of pleasure and a shadow council of influence, where the most strategic minds could direct the fate of an empire without ever leaving the confines of velvet and marble. Ultimately, the politics of desire within the harem reveal a truth about human ambition and power. What is hidden often wields more influence than what is visible. The sultan's attention, the subtle manipulations of concubines, and the intricate interplay of jealousy and strategy shaped events on a scale that extended far beyond the walls of the palace. In this world, love and ambition were inseparable, and the lines between pleasure, politics, and peril blurred. The harem was not merely a collection of women, it was an engine of influence, where the seemingly private and personal had the power to determine the destiny of empires. In the end, to understand the Ottoman Empire at its height is to understand the lethal combination of intimacy, ambition, and strategy that unfolded within the harem. Here, the human heart became a weapon, and desire a tool of political power. The stories of whispered plots, subtle manipulations, and strategic alliances reveal a world where ambition and affection intersected with lethal consequences, a world where the pursuit of favor could elevate, destroy, or even dictate the course of history itself. Few figures in Ottoman history embody the lethal combination of intelligence, ambition, and beauty like Hurrem Sultan. Born in obscurity in Eastern Europe, her early life is shrouded in mystery, but what emerges is a story of transformation, resilience, and an unparalleled grasp of power. She arrived in the Ottoman palace as a slave, one among hundreds of concubines, each seeking the favor of the Sultan. Yet, unlike others who remained invisible, Hurrem quickly distinguished herself, not merely through physical beauty, though she had that in abundance, but through a combination of wit, charm, and an almost uncanny understanding of human nature. She learned the unspoken rules of the harem, the subtleties of influence, and the precarious balance of fear, affection, and ambition that determined survival and power. At first, Hurrem's rise was subtle. She observed, listened, and calculated every interaction. In a world where a misplaced glance or an ill-timed word could mean exile or death, she mastered the art of patience and perception. She learned the Sultan's moods, his desires, his weaknesses, and used this knowledge to position herself favorably. But her ambition extended beyond mere survival. She understood that the harem was not a place for passive beauty. It was a crucible of strategy where intelligence could outweigh birthright and where the most ordinary woman could, through skill and timing, alter the destiny of an empire. Her ability to blend charm, intelligence, and political acumen made her a formidable player in this intricate game. The relationship between Hurrem and Suleiman was unlike any seen before. Traditionally, concubines served in the Sultan's favor temporarily, often replaced or discarded once their purpose was served. Hurrem, however, transformed the rules of engagement entirely. She became his confidant, his partner, and eventually his legal wife, an unprecedented elevation for a woman of concubine origin. This was not merely a personal triumph, it was a seismic shift in Ottoman politics. By becoming a permanent fixture in the Sultan's life, Hurrem gained access to influence over matters that extended far beyond the private chambers. Decisions regarding succession, appointments of viziers, and the direction of military campaigns were all subtly shaped by her counsel and interventions. Hurrem's genius lay in her ability to wield influence without appearing overtly ambitious. She understood that survival in the harem depended on perception. Power that was too visible could provoke fear and rivalry, yet power that was too concealed might remain ineffective. Through carefully cultivated relationships, whispered guidance, and strategic alliances, she shaped the Sultan's decisions while maintaining an aura of devotion and loyalty. Her rivals were numerous, and the stakes were lethal, yet Hurrem navigated these treacherous waters with skill and composure, turning potential threats into opportunities. The psychological dimension of Hurrem's strategy is as fascinating as its political impact. She operated in a world where the smallest gestures had outsized meaning. A slight delay in appearing before the Sultan, a carefully timed expression of humility, or a seemingly casual conversation could shift perception, alter favor, and redirect ambition. She became a master of emotional intelligence long before the term existed, understanding not only Suleiman's moods but also the fears, jealousies, and ambitions of those around her. Every interaction became a chess move, every smile a calculated risk, every alliance an investment in her future influence. Her rise also transformed the role of women within the harem itself. By asserting her influence subtly but decisively, Hurrem demonstrated that concubines could wield political power without overtly challenging the Sultan's authority. She created a new paradigm, where intelligence, charm, and strategic skill could rival birthright in shaping the empire's destiny. Other women observed and adapted, some aligning themselves with her, others seeking to undermine her, but all had to reckon with the fact that she had redefined the boundaries of permissible ambition within the palace. Yet Hurrem's ascent was not without cost. Her enemies were numerous and deadly. Rival concubines, court officials, and even family members navigated a world where alliances were fragile and betrayal could be fatal. She faced threats both overt and covert, plots to discredit her, poisonings, and campaigns of manipulation designed to erode her influence. Each challenge tested her intelligence, her patience, and her resolve. But Hurrem's skill lay in turning adversity into opportunity, neutralizing threats before they fully materialized and converting potential enemies into allies when possible. In doing so, she maintained a delicate equilibrium that allowed her influence to grow steadily, almost imperceptibly, until it became undeniable. Hurrem's influence extended beyond the palace into the empire itself. She advised the Sultan on appointments, diplomacy, and succession, and her guidance had consequences that reverberated across continents. By positioning her sons strategically, she shaped the line of succession, ensuring that her influence would endure even beyond her lifetime. In this way, Hurrem became not just a consort but a power broker whose interventions affected the empire's military campaigns, political appointments, and internal stability. Her role exemplifies the idea that in the Ottoman court, private ambition and intimate relationships were inseparable from statecraft. The cultural and psychological impact of Hurrem's rise cannot be overstated. She became a symbol of what women in the harem could achieve through intelligence, patience, and subtlety. Yet she was also feared, her reputation tinged with awe and dread. Stories of her cunning, ambition, and ruthless precision spread throughout the palace and beyond, creating a legend that continues to fascinate historians and storytellers alike. Her life demonstrates the paradox of the harem. It was simultaneously a gilded cage and a launchpad for extraordinary influence, where the most ordinary women could become architects of history. Hurrem's story also illustrates the broader dynamics of power within the Ottoman Empire. Her rise was possible because she understood and manipulated the psychological, social, and political structures of the harem. She saw the connections between desire, influence, and governance, and she exploited them with precision. In doing so, She became both a product of the harem system and a force that transformed it. Her life exemplifies the intertwining of the personal and the political, where love, ambition, and strategy coexisted in a tense and often dangerous equilibrium. Ultimately, Hurrem Sultan's journey from slave to sultaness is a testament to the lethal potential of intelligence, charm, and ambition in a world defined by secrecy and desire. She understood the human heart, the workings of power, and the subtle art of influence, using these insights to secure her position at the center of the empire. Through her, we see that the harem was not merely a space of private indulgence. It was a crucible of strategy, ambition, and transformation. Her story sets the stage for understanding how personal ambition, intimate relationships, and calculated influence could ripple outward, shaping the destiny of an empire and leaving a legacy that continues to captivate the imagination. Hurrem's ascent was more than personal triumph, it was a turning point in Ottoman history. Through her, the harem became not just a place of beauty and intrigue, but a fulcrum of power where ambition, intelligence, and subtlety could direct the course of an empire. Her life is a reminder that behind the gilded walls and perfumed corridors, the stakes were nothing less than the fate of dynasties, and that within this hidden world, the human heart could be as formidable a weapon as any sword. The harem was a world of opulence, yet beneath the velvet and silk, its walls concealed a darker reality, a place where ambition and desire could kill, and where survival demanded constant vigilance. Every woman who entered knew that beauty and favor were only the first steps toward influence, and that the cost of misjudgment could be unbearable. The intoxicating aroma of roses and jasmine masked whispers of betrayal, jealousy, and even murder. Within these gilded halls, the pursuit of pleasure was inseparable from the pursuit of power, and the consequences of a misstep could ripple outward, destabilizing not only individual lives but the very fabric of the empire. Conflict was woven into the daily life of the harem. Rivalries simmered just below the surface, often hidden behind polite conversation, carefully curated smiles, and shared meals. Yet these rivalries were far from harmless. A glance that suggested disrespect, a joke at the wrong time, or an ill-timed display of ambition could trigger a cascade of consequences that no amount of beauty or charm could avert. Women learned to navigate this treacherous terrain with intelligence, subtlety, and sometimes ruthlessness. In this world, ambition was not merely tolerated, it was a necessity. But ambition came with a price: the constant presence of fear, uncertainty, and the knowledge that one's fate was never entirely in one's own hands. The harem was also a place of intimate danger, where even the sultan's favor could be a double-edged sword. Those who captured his attention gained privileges, protection, and unprecedented influence, but they also became targets. Envy, resentment, and calculated plots could strike at any moment. Hurrem Sultan herself faced these perils during her rise, as rivals plotted against her with quiet ferocity, seeking to undermine her position and erode the sultan's trust. Yet she navigated these threats with skill, turning potential enemies into allies when possible, and using the sultan's attention as both shield and weapon. The balance of favor and fear was delicate, and only the most astute survived. The psychological strain of life in the harem was profound. The women were constantly aware that they were part of a machine of influence, where every word, gesture, and action could determine survival or demise. The stress of this constant vigilance shaped behavior, forging women who were as cunning as they were beautiful, as strategic as they were seductive. Emotions ran high, jealousy could ignite violence, affection could be weaponized, and ambition could drive seemingly ordinary actions to extraordinary, sometimes deadly, consequences. In this world, the stakes were personal and political simultaneously. A private misstep could have public repercussions that echoed across the empire. Perhaps the most insidious danger of the harem was its secrecy. Within the palace, the outside world had little visibility into the dramas unfolding behind closed doors. This opacity allowed intrigue to flourish, and the consequences of a plot or rivalry could remain hidden until it was too late. Assassinations, exiles, and carefully orchestrated humiliations occurred with almost surgical precision, leaving the sultan's enemies unaware of the forces that had undermined them. The very walls of the harem acted as both shield and accomplice, concealing the ruthless mechanisms of power and ambition from prying eyes. The harem also exerted a subtle influence on the empire itself. Decisions made within these chambers, about succession, appointments, or alliances, could have ramifications far beyond the palace. A concubine's intervention might decide which son would inherit the throne, which vizier would rise to power, or which military campaign would receive support. The private ambitions of the women within the harem were, in effect, exercises in statecraft, shaping the trajectory of an empire without ever appearing in official records. It is here that the convergence of personal desire and political influence becomes starkly evident. The intimate and the imperial were inseparably linked. Luxury and terror coexisted in the harem in a way that was both seductive and terrifying. Marble floors, perfumed air, and lavish furnishings created an environment of sensory indulgence, yet these same spaces could witness whispered betrayals, secret alliances, and covert acts of sabotage. The contrast between external beauty and internal peril created a psychological tension that defined life in the harem. Women who mastered this tension could thrive, using elegance, intellect, and subtlety to manipulate outcomes to their advantage. Those who failed were often removed quietly, their names erased from the tapestry of influence, leaving only shadows of what they might have achieved. The very architecture of the harem reinforced this duality of beauty and danger. Narrow corridors allowed for both privacy and surveillance, chambers were arranged to maximize observation, and balconies overlooked spaces where whispers could be both heard and concealed. Light filtered through intricately carved latticework, casting shifting patterns that created both enchantment and disorientation. Every corner, every doorway, and every window was a stage where ambition and manipulation could play out. The Sultan, seated at the apex of this orchestrated world, remained the ultimate arbiter, observing, judging, and influencing the delicate balance of favor and fear. The emotional intensity of the harem amplified the stakes. Love and loyalty, jealousy and resentment, hope and despair, were heightened in this concentrated environment. Friendships and alliances formed quickly but were fragile, often dissolving under pressure or betrayal. Women were forced to develop extraordinary resilience and strategic thinking, mastering the subtle interplay of perception and reality. Emotional intelligence became as critical as beauty or lineage, the ability to read intentions, anticipate reactions, and exploit opportunities determined survival and influence. The harem was a crucible in which human ambition and vulnerability were tested to their limits. Ultimately, the harem was a machine of consequences. Pleasure, ambition, and fear were inseparably intertwined, creating a system where the personal became political, and the smallest gesture could alter the fate of an empire. The women who inhabited these walls were both architects and subjects of this intricate web, navigating beauty and peril with a skill born of necessity. The gilded halls concealed human drama of extraordinary intensity, where ambition, jealousy, and desire collided with deadly precision. What unfolded in these chambers was far more than private indulgence. It was a mechanism through which the empire itself was subtly, invisibly shaped, proving that behind the perfumed curtains and lavish decor lay forces as powerful and as perilous as armies and laws. The story of the harem, therefore, is a story of cost. The cost of favor, the cost of ambition, and the cost of desire. Every luxury, every indulgence, came with a shadow, and every step toward influence required navigating a labyrinth of peril. The human price was immense, and yet, for those who succeeded, the rewards were equally extraordinary. It was a world where pleasure and power were inseparable, where the stakes of private ambition could reach as high as the fate of empires, and where the shadows of the harem's intrigues would echo for generations to come. The whispers of the harem did not stay confined behind its gilded walls. Though the corridors of Topkapi were hidden from the public eye, the consequences of the intrigues within could ripple outward with devastating effect. Decisions influenced by ambition, jealousy, and desire inside these private chambers often reached the empire's councils, battlefields, and even distant provinces. The harem was no longer merely a palace of pleasure or a private realm of strategy. It had become a silent force capable of shaping the fate of nations. In this way, the sultan's most intimate relationships became inseparable from the machinery of governance itself, and the empire began to feel the weight of secrets it could scarcely perceive. Succession, always a volatile matter in monarchies, was particularly vulnerable to manipulation by the women of the harem. The rise and fall of heirs depended not solely on birthright or merit but on the sultan's favor, which could be swayed by subtle influence. Hurrem Sultan, through her intelligence and strategy, played a decisive role in positioning her sons for succession, often maneuvering against rival factions within the court. The implications were immense. The personal ambitions of a single woman could determine which heirs survived, which were exiled, and which would inherit the empire. Wars, treaties, and political appointments were all affected indirectly, demonstrating the profound, almost invisible reach of the harem's influence. The harem's impact on governance extended beyond succession. Advisors, viziers, and generals were subject to the ripple effects of palace intrigue. A concubine's suggestion could alter a strategic decision, delay a campaign, or redirect resources. Rivalries and alliances within the harem mirrored those in the sultan's councils, creating a parallel network of influence. A whispered rumor in a perfumed chamber could discredit a powerful minister, while a well-timed display of favor could elevate a previously overlooked general. The personal had become political in the most literal sense. The ambitions and manipulations of women cloaked in silk and jewels could shape the empire as decisively as any law or army. The psychological weight of this influence was immense. For Suleiman, navigating the harem's subtle machinations required constant attention and discernment. Even a ruler of extraordinary intellect could be affected by personal attachments, affection, or jealousy. The sultan's decisions, while outwardly rational and calculated, were often colored by the private dramas of the palace. What may have seemed a straightforward political choice could, in reality, be influenced by a smile, a whispered suggestion, or the silent pressure of a woman's ambition. It is in this intersection of personal desire and imperial consequence that the harem's true power becomes terrifyingly clear. Conflicts within the harem also had the capacity to create broader instability. Rival factions, both male and female, used the intimate dynamics of the palace to their advantage, often manipulating information, orchestrating plots, and sowing discord. These rivalries were not trivial. They had real-world consequences that extended to governance, military campaigns, and foreign relations. A concubine's intrigue could determine the allocation of resources for war, the timing of a campaign, or the appointment of a provincial governor. Behind every seemingly minor court dispute lay a potential cascade of events that could shake the very foundations of the empire. The sultan's reliance on the harem as an instrument of governance also exposed the empire to unforeseen vulnerabilities. A favor granted in the heat of desire, a strategic move made in response to subtle persuasion, or a miscalculation in judgment could have consequences far beyond the palace. The delicate balance of influence required constant vigilance, and even Suleiman, with his legendary intellect, was not immune to missteps. The empire itself became a reflection of the harem's intricate politics, elegant on the surface, yet fraught with invisible currents of tension, rivalry, and danger beneath. History provides stark examples of the harem's influence turning personal intrigue into political crisis. Sons of rival factions were exiled, alliances were shattered, and plots hatched in the shadows of perfumed chambers could ignite open conflict. Courtiers learned that decisions made in private could determine life or death, loyalty or betrayal, peace or war. The harem was a theater in which personal and political stakes collided, creating a precarious environment where every action mattered and every omission could prove fatal. It was a realm where ambition and desire became engines of empire, capable of both creation and destruction. Even the most mundane occurrences could be loaded with consequence. A concubine's favor could alter the sultan's opinion of a minister, influencing the appointment or dismissal of officials. The distribution of gifts, the timing of appearances, and even the seating arrangements during ceremonies became subtle yet powerful tools for shaping outcomes. The harem's influence was pervasive precisely because it operated in secrecy. It was invisible to the untrained eye but omnipresent in its effects. This invisibility amplified its power, making it both indispensable and dangerous to the functioning of the empire. Moreover, the harem created a psychological environment in which manipulation was normalized and expected. Women learned to harness the sultan's emotions, manage rivalries, and deploy charm strategically. In turn, the sultan's decision-making was subtly informed by these interactions, blurring the line between personal preference and statecraft. Every gesture, glance, and word became a thread in a larger tapestry of influence, where the stakes were not merely domestic but imperial. The boundaries between desire and power, affection and strategy, were indistinguishable, demonstrating how deeply private intrigue could shape public consequence. The empire, magnificent and sprawling, owed much of its stability to the skillful management of these hidden dynamics. Yet, it also bore the scars of the harem's influence. Decisions influenced by ambition, favoritism, and manipulation sometimes resulted in political missteps, delayed campaigns, or internal unrest. The sultan's reliance on the harem as both an intimate refuge and a political instrument made the empire vulnerable to subtle, invisible forces that could alter the course of history without ever appearing in official chronicles. The harem was simultaneously a sanctuary and a crucible, nurturing brilliance while harboring the seeds of crisis. Ultimately, the story of the harem's influence on the empire is a story of power in its most insidious form. It is a tale of how private ambition and desire, concealed behind the walls of luxury, could dictate the fates of generals, ministers, heirs, and entire populations. What transpired within the gilded corridors of Topkapi was not mere intrigue, it was the shaping of history itself. The empire's successes and failures, its triumphs and crises, were inseparably entwined with the machinations of the women who lived in these secret chambers. The harem was a hidden engine of power, a shadowy force whose reach extended far beyond the velvet curtains, shaping the destiny of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. In the end, the empire in crisis reveals a fundamental truth: absolute power is not solely wielded through armies, laws, or proclamations, but also through subtle influence, intimate counsel, and human desire. The harem, for all its beauty and indulgence, was a crucible in which the fates of men and nations were forged. Its secrets were as potent as any edict, its intrigues as lethal as any sword. To understand the Ottoman Empire at its height is to understand the invisible force of the harem, a hidden world where personal ambition, desire, and strategy intersected to shape history itself. Centuries later, the corridors of Topkapi Palace are silent. The perfumed whispers of ambition, jealousy, and desire have faded into history, yet their echoes linger etched into the walls, the marble floors, and the legacy of the empire they helped shape. The harem, once a crucible of power and peril, now exists largely as a symbol, gilded, romanticized, and sanitized for the modern imagination. Yet beneath the surface, the lessons of its intrigues remain raw and unforgettable. The human dynamics that unfolded behind its closed doors, ambition, manipulation, loyalty, and betrayal, continue to fascinate, revealing truths about desire, power, and the fragility of even the greatest empires. Hurrem's sultan, Suleiman's consort, remains perhaps the most enduring figure of this shadowed history. Her story is a testament to the transformative power of intelligence, strategy, and psychological insight. From her beginnings as a slave, she rose to a position that allowed her to influence the empire's policies, succession, and stability. She reshaped the rules of engagement within the harem, proving that intellect and ambition could rival birthright and traditional authority. Hurrem's life demonstrates that power is often wielded most effectively in silence, through subtle persuasion and careful orchestration, rather than overt command. Her legacy reminds us that influence is rarely where it is most visible. It often thrives in shadow, behind beauty, behind desire, and behind the veiled corridors of secrecy. The broader harem, beyond the figure of Hurrem, also serves as a mirror to human nature. It is a reminder that ambition, desire, and jealousy are universal forces capable of shaping both private lives and public history. Within the palace, the stakes were magnified, but the motivations were entirely human. Love became strategy, rivalry became survival, and personal ambition became a tool capable of influencing armies, governors, and even the succession of emperors. In this sense, the harem was not merely a historical curiosity, it was an extreme reflection of human psychology, compressed into a world of beauty, danger, and high stakes. The consequences of the harem's influence extended beyond the palace, affecting not only political appointments and military campaigns but also the culture of the empire itself. Decisions shaped by private counsel and personal ambition influenced governance, law, and diplomacy. The lessons of the harem, though hidden, reverberated through the empire, demonstrating the inseparable link between personal ambition and statecraft. The women who navigated its dangers became architects of history, shaping events in ways that were largely invisible to the broader population. Their stories challenge our understanding of power, showing that influence is not always formal, and that the quiet manipulation of human relationships can have consequences as profound as armies or decrees. Yet the harem's history is also a cautionary tale. Its opulence concealed danger, and its pleasures carried high costs. The pursuit of favor and influence required constant vigilance, emotional intelligence, and strategic calculation. Mistakes were often fatal, and the consequences of ambition could ripple far beyond the walls of the palace. The harem demonstrates how desire and power, when intertwined, can become both intoxicating and deadly. It reveals the thin line between survival and destruction, loyalty and betrayal, love and manipulation, lessons that remain relevant in understanding the dynamics of power in any era. The legacy of the harem is not confined to the Ottoman Empire. It offers a broader reflection on the nature of hidden influence and the ways in which private ambition shapes public outcomes. In any society, decisions made in secret, guided by desire, fear, or loyalty, can have ramifications far beyond the individuals involved. The harem exemplifies this principle in its most extreme form, a gilded laboratory where the human psyche and political strategy intersected with lethal precision. Its stories remind us that the most profound forces in history are often those that operate unseen, driven by human emotions and ambitions that are at once intimate and universal. History, in this sense, is as much about hidden chambers as it is about battlefields. The harem teaches us that power is not always exercised openly and that influence often lies where we least expect it, in whispered words, subtle gestures, and carefully calculated actions. It forces us to reconsider the conventional narratives of history, to look beyond public proclamations and military campaigns, and to recognize the private dramas that quietly shape nations. The Ottoman harem, in all its danger and beauty, is a testament to the potency of the hidden and the unseen. As we reflect on this world, we are left with awe, discomfort, and fascination. The harem was a crucible where desire met strategy, where ambition met survival, and where personal influence intertwined with imperial destiny. Its lessons are enduring, that power is never simple, that human emotion is inseparable from political decision, and that the most profound influences are often invisible, subtle, and personal. In understanding the harem, we gain not only insight into the Ottoman Empire but also a mirror into the enduring nature of human ambition, desire, and cunning. Ultimately, the legacy of the harem is a reminder that even the most magnificent empires are fragile, their destinies shaped as much by private ambition as by public power. The whispers of Topkapi Palace, though centuries old, continue to resonate, offering insight into the dangerous interplay of beauty, desire, and strategy. The women of the harem, through their intelligence, ambition, and courage, left an indelible mark on history. Their stories compel us to consider the hidden forces behind every great empire and to recognize that sometimes the corridors of power are most perilous when paved with silk, perfumed with roses, and lined with secrets that could destroy kings. In the end, the harem's shadows outlasted its pleasures, its whispers outlasted its walls, and its influence outlasted its time. What unfolded within those gilded chambers is more than historical curiosity. It is a timeless reflection on human ambition, desire, and the perilous beauty of power. The empire may endure in records, monuments, and stories, but the intimate dramas of the harem, the hidden maneuvers, the whispered alliances, the lethal charm of ambition, endure as a warning and a marvel, a testament to the fact that the most profound forces in history are often those that remain unseen. The story of the Ottoman harem does not end with closed doors or silent corridors. Its echoes persist, a reminder that human ambition, desire, and cunning can shape empires as profoundly as armies and laws. Within Topkapi Palace, the most intimate relationships, whispers, glances, and subtle gestures, became instruments of influence, directing decisions that rippled across the Ottoman world. The harem was a crucible of power where beauty and intelligence were both shield and weapon, and survival demanded skill, strategy, and emotional acuity. Hurrem's sultan exemplifies this hidden power. Rising from slave to sultaness, she transformed the rules of the harem and demonstrated that influence could be wielded silently, subtly, yet with enormous impact. Her interventions shaped succession, appointments, and the direction of the empire itself, proving that the personal and political were inseparable. The harem, through figures like Harem, reveals that history is not only made in public battles and decrees but in private corridors and whispered strategies. Yet the harem was not only a story of triumph, it was a warning. Ambition carried risk, jealousy could be lethal, and desire was both tool and trap. These women mastered perception, manipulation, and emotional intelligence under constant threat, reminding us that power often thrives unseen and operates in shadows. The legacy of the harem endures because it illuminates the extremes of human nature, the drive for influence, the peril of desire, and the quiet potency of private action. The corridors may be silent now, but their lessons remain, that the most consequential forces are often hidden, subtle, and personal, and that even empires can be shaped by whispers, charm, and ambition behind gilded walls.